So we're here today at the Walnut Street Greenhouses here on campus in Madison, Wisconsin. Nick, what are we going to be talking about during this video today?
Sure, yeah, we're going to touch on some potential herbicide shortages we expect to see in 2022. And then we're going to talk about some of the key components you're going to need if you're going to rely on glufosinate or Liberty as a post-emergent herbicide in soybeans. And lastly, we're going to talk about a herbicide resistance overview and give you a status of what's going on with resistant weeds in the state of Wisconsin.
Excellent, a lot of good stuff. Let's do it.
All right, Rodrigo. So every year there's always some new unprecedented challenge for our growers and how they can control weeds. Looking into your crystal ball here, fall 2021, towards 2022, what's something that we can help warn growers, prepare them for this next year?
Yeah, so weather always makes weed control very challenging. Unfortunately, our crystal ball is not that good, right, Nick, that we know what next year is going to bring. However, one thing we have been hearing a lot this past couple weeks is that there will be some shortages of some key herbicides that we use in our cropping systems out there. The main ones, Nick, is going to be, the first one is glyphosate, and the second one that we keep hearing on is glufosinate. And it's not only limited to these two, but I would say right now these are the main two herbicides that we think we won't have as much as we wish we did.
Sure. So, you know, Rodrigo, if you've been to one of our talks, and I know you have, we always say glyphosate resistance is rampant. So why are we concerned about glyphosate not being around?
Yeah, we get that question a lot. Say, hey, should I just take glyphosate out of my tank, given I have all these resistant weeds that I'm dealing with, water hemp, giant ragweed, and some others? One thing I want to challenge you is to take that glyphosate out of the tank, and then you realize how important glyphosate is. We've seen that in our research plots this year. We designed some trials where we left glyphosate out, and we regretted. Nick, what did we see in some of those trials at the end of the season?
Lots of grass.
Grasses.
Yeah.
So grasses, some velvet leaf, and some other weeds that we typically don't struggle with because glyphosate is really effective. So what's my point here? Even though we're struggling with a lot of glyphosate-resistant weeds out there, glyphosate is still a very effective herbicide. It takes care of a lot of the grasses that we're dealing with. We're using glyphosate for cover crop terminations. There's so many reasons why we're using glyphosate. And that's the point of our update here today. So folks, thinking about the next growing season, the 2022 growing season is, okay, there's a chance for shortages of these herbicides. Okay, again, glyphosate and also glufosinate, as we just mentioned. So start planning strategically. Okay, if you're planning on using glyphosate, go out there right now, try to secure as much as possible. And if there is indeed a shortage, this is when we want to challenge our applicators, our growers out there to use the winter time to think about alternative strategies to control those weeds in case they don't have glyphosate available to them.
So one of the things we wanted to touch on here in preparation for the 2022 growing season is glufosinate, or a product we commonly know as Liberty. And so we know that glufosinate in recent years, and we're going to continue to rely on this, is becoming a more common post-emergent herbicide in soybeans. And why is that, Rodrigo?
Yeah, that's right on, Nick. So with the platforms that we have available for us, the XtendFlex, the Enlist, and the LGT27 platforms, they all allow for over-the-top applications of glufosinate. And glufosinate is quite a very effective herbicide in some of the weeds that we're struggling with out there, primarily water hemp, Nick. So we do believe that glufosinate, it's going to become a herbicide that our growers are going to be using more and more moving forward.
Perfect. So one thing that we know that's important when we're applying a post-emergent herbicide for weeds is weed size. So what can you show us here, Rodrigo, on that and its importance?
Excellent. So we're here in our greenhouses. This is actually part of an experiment. We have sprayed glufosinate when the water hemp plants were at two different heights. On my right here, I have plants that were 8 inches in height when they were sprayed. And then the plants on my left here, they were 3 inches in height. So what you have in the camera right in front of you now are the plants that were sprayed 2 to 3 weeks ago. They were about 8 inches in height, and then you can see all the regrowth coming back, and some of the plants are already flowering. Now, these plants that we treated when they were 3 inches in height, we got 100% control. Okay, so glufosinate is indeed a very effective herbicide, Nick, but we got to spray it at the right time. Okay.
Right.
Nick, question for you. So height is the first thing we're covering. We got to be hitting them when they're small. What else should our growers be thinking about when they're using glufosinate post-emergence for weed control in their soybeans?
Sure, great question. So we know that glufosinate is a contact herbicide. So that means coverage is key. You think contact, you think coverage. We want to make sure that in order to get a good coverage of the plant, that we increase our gallon per acre. And so we want a minimum of 15 gallons per acre if we're going to be spraying Liberty or glufosinate. And we could even encourage to increase that to 20 if you have the opportunity to, because we know that the better coverage you can get, the better control. Additionally, our adjuvants are being extremely important with Liberty. So we want to make sure that you're using AMS, and that is going to really improve the ability to control the water hemp when we're going after them right at that appropriate weed size.
Excellent. So we talked about spraying small plants, using the right adjuvants, in the case of glufosinate, making sure you have AMS in the tank, and then coverage, right, 15, 20 gallons to the acre. And the last thing I want to mention here, Nick, for folks spraying glufosinate post-emergence, spray during daytime hours. You want to make sure you have plenty of daylight when it's hot, when you have high light intensity out there. Those conditions tend to favor glufosinate efficacy. So if you check all those marks, you're more likely to achieve successful control with glufosinate.
Awesome. All right, Rodrigo, a big part of our program is these herbicide-resistant weeds. You want to give everybody an update on what we're seeing out there with resistant weeds right now?
Absolutely, Nick. So we have our grad students that work here in these greenhouses. Our students are always actively screening for resistance to help our stakeholders better understand what's going on across the landscape and fine-tune their management strategies. Water hemp has been the main one for our program. All the work that Felipe Faleco has done over the years here, we have documented widespread occurrence of ALS, glyphosate resistance, some PPO resistance. But we're keeping a close eye now on the response of this water hemp populations to 2,4-D, dicamba, and glufosinate, which are the newer options here that our growers can use post-emergence in soybeans. And we have a little bit of concern there because not all populations are responding already the way they should. So we always tell folks to be on the lookout, especially if they're using one of these 3 herbicides that I just mentioned. If they're not seeing the performance that they expect to see, to reach out to us in extension and talk to us. Maybe we can collect some seeds and do some screenings on that.
Sure. So whenever we hear herbicide-resistant weeds, we almost always hear water hemp following that. But as you and I, weed scientists, we know there's a whole complex of weeds out there that we have resistance issues with. What else are we seeing here in Wisconsin?
Yep. So I would say historically, over the past decade or so, giant ragweed has been a big weed here in Wisconsin, Nick. And I would say, over the past 4 or 5 years, kind of water hemp has been at that forefront. Everybody's worried about water hemp, but this 2021 growing season, we got a lot more calls on giant ragweed than we ever had before. So giant ragweed is also a weed, again, to keep an eye on. Our herbicide programs are really focused on water hemp, and remember, water hemp is a small seeded weed species. So what usually works from a residual standpoint and some of the post programs that work really well for water hemp does not necessarily work well for giant ragweed. So we need to keep that in mind. So through the work that Faleco has done here over the past couple of years, we screened some giant ragweed populations. We're seeing resistance to glyphosate. We're seeing ALS resistance, Nick. And there is one particular population that we're really worried about, which is a population that was detected in food-grade soybeans, so in systems where you cannot use glyphosate post-emergence, dicamba, glufosinate, or 2,4-D, where they've been using fomazepine or a PPO herbicide for multiple years now, and then the control was not as effective as it used to be. Faleco has his plants in the greenhouse, and this is somewhat what you got in front of you. And what we're confirming here is that this is probably the first occurrence, or at least to us, confirmed case of PPO resistance in giant ragweed. So what's my point here? It's more than just water hemp. If we're using the same strategies over and over and over, we end up selecting for resistance, just like we're seeing here, giant ragweed evolving resistance to fomazepine in this case, Nick.
Excellent. So I know, when we take a step back from just resistance, we talk about weeds that we're dealing with and other problem weeds. We always usually have new or emerging weeds in the state. And I'll say that one thing that we've gotten a lot of calls over this last year especially is another amaranth, Palmer amaranth. And that's something we know is a particular problem in a lot of states southern from here, but we are starting to see it really tick up here in Wisconsin, where this year we've documented Palmer amaranth in 11 counties across Wisconsin. So we know that this is a weed that's here to stay.